Well, this morning on Media and Society, we have a look at the AU Media Fellowship Program that aims to empower African media professionals and journalists. And we talk to the Competition Commission about the inquiry into media and digital platforms. Well, hello and welcome to Media and Society. I'm your host, Naledi Muloa. As usual, of course, and you know this is the show where we take a look at the intersection between the media and society. And as usual, this show is not complete without your input. So over the next hour, feel free to give us a call on 011-714-0661 or 0662. Why don't you tweet us using the hashtag SABC Media and Society or the handle at SABC_MNS. Well, it is a glorious morning for South Africans today after what was truly a nail-biting and frustrating game last night between the Boks and England. But congratulations to the Springboks for making it through to yet another Rugby World Cup final. And of course, the celebrations continuing. So feel free to share them with us on Twitter as well. Many South Africans feeling very proud this morning. Let's get into our discussion for today. So the African Union Media Fellowship serves as a distinctive program meticulously crafted to offer African journalists and content creators an invaluable opportunity. But its core mission is to empower them with the skills and knowledge that are required for them to reshape the narrative surrounding Africa by promoting stories that not only present a balanced perspective, but also vividly capture the rich and diverse experiences of our continent's people in innovative and engaging ways. Well, joining us to discuss this is health and community journalist from Namibia, Tuyeimo Haidula. Tuyeimo, good morning to you. Thank you so much for joining us.
Good morning, Naledi, and thank you for having me.
An absolute pleasure having you with us. Mohamed Mohamud, who is the founder of Somali Sideways, also joins us. Mohamed, good morning to you, and thank you for joining us.
Pleasure to be here. Thank you.
All right. And we're also joined by Ms. Faith Adhiambo, who is the communication officer at the African Union. Faith, good morning to you, and thank you for joining us.
Good morning. Thank you for having me.
I must tell you, I'm very excited about this particular discussion, because what we do a lot of the time here on Media and Society is really try and find those pockets of opportunity where we're seeing, interesting perspectives of not just South Africa, but the continent being portrayed on media platforms. Let's talk about the fellowship first, Faith, what it aims to do, how it came about.
So the African Union decided, media has always been a very important, integral part of the African Union. And for as long as I can remember, from its inception in 1963, the media has been very close in terms of, if not the most important stakeholder, because you are the bridge between the African Union and its citizens. And we thought it fit to be able to kind of have a program that focuses specifically on the needs of African journalists. And we identified 3 issues. We are looking at skills development as one of the key elements to be able to upskill our African journalists, for them to be able to be, to tell great African stories with the best, with the best skills possible in the continent to be able to compete. Because for a very long time, our stories have always been told by other people and not us, right? And then, of course, the age-old conversation around resources. So we look and say, okay, we understand that African journalists are struggling, XYZ. So we say, why don't you come up with resources to be able to fund these African stories? Funding African stories does not mean telling you what to say, but we want to be able to fund your passion, to be able to tell the African stories to the world. Then we look at giving access to the storytellers and newsmakers, because sometimes it's difficult to be able to get African journalists to the table where the conversations are happening. So, for example, if at the G20 meeting in India, we're looking at taking journalists all over the world to be able to cover African stories from an African perspective to Africans. So that really is the reason why we thought to be able to have this. And over and above that, we have the most important thing, which is political will. Because African ministers of information and communication have met several times. But in 2017, they made a very important decision to be able to give the information and communications the mandate to be able to create programs and even awards for African journalists, to be able to recognize them and bring them to the global platform and also to the continent.
That's brilliant. Mohamed, tell us a little bit about the work that you do and why you joined the fellowship.
Yeah, so I'm the founder of a media platform called Somali Sideways, which is looking to change the misconceptions on how the world views the Somali region and its people. A lot of African countries are struggling with different types of perceptions. Somalia is, no different, and I'm trying to combat that through visual storytelling.
Yeah.
And I applied through the fellowship because I felt that this was something that I want to amplify my work into a more African context because, my work focuses around Somalis, and I want to incorporate it in like African stories and try to amplify it into a new sort of project.
Yeah, wonderful work. And tell us about the work that you're doing in Namibia.
I'm a journalist in Namibia, but I focus more solely on health and human rights issues.
Yeah.
That's because that's
a
where my
difficult
interest.
topic.
Yes,
Yeah.
very difficult indeed. But I want to focus more on health in Namibia because I want the decision makers and the lawmakers to understand that we need to look at these issues so that they can make decisions that impact the whole of Africa, right? And the reason why I want to join the fellowship, or I have joined the fellowship, is so that we can look at backstreet abortion in Namibia. It's a very serious issue, and I want the lawmakers to see what is happening background, because abortion is currently illegal in Namibia, and it's only legal in 2 cases where it's in incest and on rape.
Yeah, that's a very sensitive topic globally, and of course what we don't do is zone in on what that topic looks like on the continent often enough. So very, very important work that you're doing. Faith, I want to come back to you. You made a point earlier about how for the longest time our stories have been told by others, and I think I want to sit there a little bit because there's a trickle-down effect of that, right? I think certainly over the past decade we've seen even international media platforms, some of the bigger role players in the global media space, really starting to say, well, no, if we're going to tell African stories on these big media platforms, whether it be CNN or BBC, let's get the people in the country to be the correspondents. That wasn't the case over a decade ago. What are the implications of that, of what we were seeing just over a decade ago, right? Where you had stories that were being told about Africa by people that didn't live the daily life of Africans.
I'll give you a fantastic example. There was a study that was done by the Africa No Filter about how harmful narratives are affecting the continent. And this specifically was in business. And what happened is that they realized that I think a small percentage of African journalists were actually telling the African story. So what they have done and what we have actually done with them is to be able to bring African journalists to the foreground. Because for a very long time, again, like you've mentioned, African journalists are not talking about the continent. And because of that tide and the work they have done and the work we have done as well, what is happening now is African journalists are being given the opportunity to be able to speak about the continent, especially when it comes to trade. Because the more you talk about the country in specific ways in terms of conflict and, I think there's so many other things happening within the continent that now more African journalists are highlighting, and you can now be able to see some international journalists who come from the continent are highlighting some of those, nuances and kind of correcting them, be it via social media, but also really taking charge and calling out the kind of, conversations that are happening that are not necessarily true about the continent. And the advent of social media is also really helping African journalists really frame what the continent is. And because of that, we're seeing a lot of investment coming into the continent because now we're not the one continent that's in conflict. But there's so many other things about the continent because of these good news stories that different African journalists are actually telling, not only on social media, but also on various national platforms. So it's creating a lot of Pan-Africanism and a lot of excitement around the continent, and that's trickling down. G20 is a very good example, I would say.
And it's interesting that you talk about how investment certainly is being driven more and more into the continent as a result of people really understanding that the conflict isn't just one big block of conflict, right? And I think that obviously Somalia having struggled with a lot of those misconceptions, right? So talk to me about a few examples of how, you've had to tackle some of those misconceptions.
Yeah, I mean, it comes to no surprise that Somalia has gone through 30 years of civil war. They've had basically no government for a very long time. The transitional government happened in the early 2000s, but it formated in around 2010-11. But yeah, like we go through a lot of things like lawlessness, anarchy, there's a lot of like piracy and things like that are happening. And of course, there's a terrorist group that's in the region as well, not just affecting Somalia, but East Africans. So yeah, like for me, like of course, I'm not saying that these things aren't happening. Of course they are, but that's one specific lens. I want to look at different types of lenses, and in order for you to understand what's actually going on, is speaking to the people. And my project is trying to get authentic stories, personal stories of Somalis, not just the Somali region, but also from the diaspora.
Yeah, what do you call it? Developmental journalism, right? Where you're saying, well, we are facing a certain level of crises, but we need to move forward. I mean, give me examples of how you've been able to do that, because that's quite a feat that you're taking on.
I mean, like I basically my project is like interviewing Somalis. So my project is split into different types of categories. So some are focusing on business or entrepreneurship, some are focusing on family life, some are focusing on experiences of civil war, some are focusing on travel, because we as Somalis are nomadic people. There's more Somalis outside of the region than in the region, and they pump in around like billions, just to help the economy. So with remittance and all that. So yeah, I focus on these sort of like subjects in order for me to bring out the authentic Somali story.
Yeah, is it a similar challenge in Namibia where you've got the realization of perhaps inequality, certainly extreme poverty in some parts of Namibia, and then you've got to be able to tell the story of opportunity in Namibia? How have you been able to do that?
No, certainly we do have that challenge in Namibia. I think it's a global challenge, not only in the African continent. And how we tackle that in Namibia, especially with journalism, is where we tell stories, or we try to reach out to the communities and tell stories, solution-based narrative, basically, on how people are attempting to solve issues within their own communities. And when you give people that platform, it allows them to feel that they're part of the story. It's sort of news from us for you, so it works quite well in that instance.
Yeah, well, you guys are going to stay with us, but I want to sit with you a little bit, Faith, here, and talk about the outcomes that you're hoping for. Multiple times here on Media and Society, we've reached out to media professionals from various parts of the continent, because we want to see what collaborative efforts look like when we tell that story of collaboration. I mean, we can talk about, the African Union and certainly, the Africa Continental Free Trade Area that has wanted to stimulate intra-Africa trade. But you also want to see that collaboration across the media space. So, where are the green shoots that you're starting to see where those collaborative efforts are taking place?
I'll start by saying an empowered media empowers the citizen. And this fellowship essentially creates cross-border journalism, because last year we had 15 fellows from 13 different countries, and we have seen a lot of collaboration that's been happening. We have a journalist from Egypt working with a journalist from Rwanda on CFTA. So we have a journalist from Niger who did an excellent story about how goods are moving from Cameroon to Ghana.
Yes.
And he collaborated with one of the journalists in Cameroon. We have a journalist from South Africa who's working with another journalist in Ghana, working on climate change. And we're looking at different perspectives within the continent, and we're looking at good news stories and also balanced stories, because we have good news stories also as the continent. So those collaborations are looking really amazing. And this year we have 20 journalists from 20 different countries. So the possibilities are endless in terms of collaboration. On a larger scale, we're looking at having national broadcasters working together. So we're looking at SABC maybe collaborating with the KBC in Kenya to be able to tell stories. We are looking at I don't know which other national broadcasters, maybe
BTV, Botswana TV, for instance.
Working with Namibia, for example, to be able to tell amazing sports stories, because the continent is carrying sports. I mean, you just talked about rugby, and those are some of the good news stories we need to tell, because as the media, we need to be able to inform the citizen, not only to make good decisions in terms of governance and, but we also need to be able to tell them stories in which they're able to see themselves and celebrate everything African.
Where are the opportunities then for us to see also conflict resolution? And I know this is a difficult one, right? But where you've also got, whether it be regional conflict or whatever it may be, there's an opportunity for those storytellers to really start to almost play a role in that conflict resolution. I mean, where are those opportunities that you see?
I look at it in one way, and which the Media Fellowship already offers. We are looking at giving them access to the newsmakers. When I say access to the newsmakers, we're looking at giving you access to the rooms in where those decisions are being made, because I feel like that's the start. Because if you don't go to the source of the news and then you start, faffing around and saying, all sorts of other things and picking the news from different outlets, then you really don't get the real story. So I feel really what African journalists are able to have is access to the newsmakers and access to the rooms where those decisions are being made. Therefore, they are able to tell informed stories that are able to let Africans know that Africa is in charge.
I'm really enjoying the fact that the fellows also are so young. And we're going to take a short break. And when we come back, we're going to talk a little bit more about that, of course, about, what opportunities that young storytellers on the continent actually can bring to the fore of the narrative that we put forward about the continent. But thank you so much to Faith Adhiambo, who is, of course, the Communications Officer for the African Union. We're back in a moment. Stay with us. Welcome back. You're watching Media and Society. So for a considerable time, Africa has struggled to convey its own narrative through the authentic perspectives of its people. Initiatives like the AU Media Fellowship aspire to foster a collaborative spirit, enabling us to collectively unveil the multitude of stories that really encapsulate the continent, all seen through the unique lens of ourselves as African journalists. Well, still joining us now, in fact, joining our discussion is a South African journalist, Jan Bornman. We're also still with the health and community journalist from Namibia, Tuyeimo Haidula, and from Somalia, we are still with Mohamed Mohamud, who is the founder of Somali Sideways. Jan, thanks for joining us. Still buzzing from the rugby. Still buzzing from the rugby. So tell me about how you joined the AU Fellowship.
I applied for the program as well. And I mean, the thing that attracted me about the program was the possibility of expanding your work across the continent and learning from fellow colleagues across the continent. That's...
Well, tell us about the work that you have been doing here back home.
So I've been working as a journalist for more than a decade, and the past 5 years or so I've focused predominantly on stories around migration, refugees and asylum seekers, and xenophobia. And issues around xenophobia obviously come from really dangerous stereotypes. I mean, my colleagues were talking about stereotypes earlier. So my work looks at challenging these really dangerous stereotypes.
You know what I find interesting, and this is why I thought it was important for us to bring in a South African, because there is a sense that South African media and the consumers of South African media tend to be very inward looking. I mean, if you look at the latest sort of data of market share of what South Africans are watching, I mean, up to 80% of South Africans primarily only watch local news channels. Not a lot of them actually venture out to what is happening in the rest of the world. Would you say that that is dangerous for us, and why?
Yes. I think South Africa has somehow managed to make itself not African in a sense by ignoring what's happening to our neighbors. And you just look at like the elections in Zimbabwe, for example, and our officials kind of approving what's happened there. So,
and there's an important role that South Africa needs to be playing, of course, as you've got agreements like the African Continental Free Trade Area. Can we talk a little bit about how you guys are covering that, if at all? Because it's such an important move, by African states, where you've got African states becoming signatories of this agreement that says we're committing to more intra-Africa trade, right? How are you telling that story in your country about, stimulating trade amongst African countries and saying, we can reach across the border and build each other's economies?
I mean, Somalia, it's if you're looking at it from a historical lens, we've interacted with trade hundreds of years ago, but we kind of lost that because of the issues that are affecting the Somali region and country. So for us, it's more of starting from the bottom, essentially, and how we can collaborate with our neighboring states first, and then obviously branching it out to, relations with other African countries. But it all starts from home. I mean, for us, our biggest issue is safety and security. And I think before you do anything, I think you have to start from there. You have to start from home. But yeah, I feel like with Somalis, we're in terms of like entrepreneurship and business, I think we're one of the like leading in a sense. We have one of the fastest telecommunications network, and people always, assume like, how is Somalia like in war for the last 25 years, but they have the fastest telecommunications network.
Yeah.
So in terms of business and entrepreneurship, we're good. We like to start something from nothing to something.
Yeah.
We're very good at that. But yeah, in terms of like, we have a long way to go, a very long way to go.
I quite like that you've mentioned telecommunications, and we're going to come to it a little bit later, because there's a massive opportunity there for easy collaboration where you've got, what we call the fourth industrial revolution. I don't know if you still call it that in 2023. But can we talk a little bit about what the intra-Africa trade conversation looks like within Namibia? Because I know that where South Africa is sitting and we look at Namibia, we think, look at what they're doing with their energy plans, right? That's certainly massive growth that we're seeing from our side.
I think Namibia right now is the hub. Everyone should come to Namibia right now, because we
sell it.
Yes, with the green hydrogen that's currently happening right now, that is the biggest project that we have in Namibia right now, the green hydrogen plant. And the Namibian government is looking at how we can trade on the African continent and make Namibia great, and use the Namibian platform from the green hydrogen point of view, and as well as on the oil. We're discovering oil on the Kavango East, Kavango West, and the Zambezi platforms. So that we're using that trade to, bring in people from the African continent and use the global perspective on how to enrich Namibia in that sense.
Yeah, and I think that it certainly is a great, we've seen quite a bit of collaboration between Namibia and various other countries where some of those explorations have taken place. I mean, what's the response even from the global community then, when you've got those stories of Namibia saying, well, we're developing our economy and we're going to talk about it as much as possible?
We've seen quite a positive response, starting from South Africa, for example, that's on the African continent. Just we can say that we have seen that President Ramaphosa is very quite in touch with President Hage Geingob on how they can collaborate and use the green hydrogen to develop Africa as a whole, and not just use it and not just use it to the advantage of the Namibians, but also for the African continent as a whole.
Yeah, we had the Green Hydrogen Energy Summit to take place in Cape Town this past week, and a lot of the conversation was about collaboration between South Africa and Namibia, where that is concerned. So really, really important, right? Let's talk a little bit about what we're doing and what you want to see being done more from a South African media point of view. Because it's easy for us to say, well, South Africans simply aren't educated about what's happening on the rest of the continent and the goals to try and build more African storytelling as a unified voice on the continent. But we can easily say that South African media simply isn't doing enough as well.
Absolutely. But I think it comes down to resources. Even a platform like the SABC would have 10, 15 years ago had bureaus across the continent. And we know it's a challenge facing the media across the world, sustainability and funding the work. So I think the fellowship, for example, is a great opportunity for us to meet colleagues in other countries, to be able to, as Faith mentioned earlier, to enable the cross-border journalism.
Yeah, I'm going to open up the lines, right? Give us a call on 011-714-0661. We're joined by young journalists from various parts of the continent. Jan is from South Africa, Tuyeimo is from Namibia, and of course, Mohamed is from Somalia. Give us a call, 011-714-0661. Let us know, what is your call to action for these African journalists that are wanting to set the tone for what African unity is going to look like? And I'm going to come to now digitization for a little bit. There's two terms now, and it gets a little bit confusing and quite technical. But I'm going to start with you, Mohamed, because there's of course the issue that, you've talked about how, Somalia has been able to do really well from a telecommunications point of view, beyond people's expectations. Where have you seen great collaborative efforts there? I mean, surely when you've got telecommunications doing so well, we should be able to tell stories easily, despite the shortage of bureaus that Jan is talking about. Yeah,
Somalis, we're very well connected on social media, for example. We're very well versed in terms of like showcasing our work and and promoting business and things like that online. So we're very well connected in that sense. And I feel like there's a lot of collaboration that I've seen between businesses, between artists, between different types of individuals, trying to basically better the Somali, the region and the cities around Somalia. You know, for us, for example, we're very well versed in terms of, we have a fantastic, in my opinion, artist culture. We're very well versed in music, photography and film, even before the civil war that took place. So we're trying to revitalize the art that's happening. Previously we recently opened a national theatre for the first time in 30 years. So yeah, we're slowly but surely getting into that.
Yeah, but what you've also seen perhaps in areas like East Africa is a great move where tech and innovation is concerned. I mean, do you have enough? Okay, let's talk about the shortages, because it's all good and well to say, well, we've done well in this area, but let's talk about where the work still needs to be done to get not just media professionals, but consumers of media plugged in to digital spaces as well.
Yeah, I mean, there's a lot of apps out there, like money transfers, for example. There's a money transfer company called World Remit. I'm sure you heard of it. It's very around the world, and it started by a Somali guy. And yeah, so in terms of digitalization and downloading of mobile apps and things like that, we're very well versed in that. A lot of the time, people, when I went to Somalia in 2019, there was a lot of people that were saying, "Oh, you should download this app to get this. You should download this app to get that."
Yeah.
So in terms of digitalization and mobile usage and apps and things like that, it's it's growing on an exponential rate. But yeah, there's a lot of issues that we still need to face, like I mentioned earlier. But yeah.
Yeah, and in Namibia, because you've got obviously great innovation from an energy point of view, is that translating into the digital world and getting people access to information?
No, yeah, absolutely. We have the mobile telecommunication service, which is MTC. That is our biggest service provider. And they have a program now which they call 081 Everyone, Everywhere.
Okay.
So they are trying to create stations in all the regions in the country. We have 14 regions currently in Namibia, and they are available in almost the 14 regions, right? So we have digitalization that's currently happening in Namibia, and we're looking at it. Journalists are embracing it. Digitalization has changed how news is being told on the African continent, not just in Namibia itself. People are snacking on news. They are no longer reading the entire article.
Yeah.
As we sit here, they are probably just
tuning in and out.
Yeah.
Because they've got short attention spans now, 3-minute bites, and that's all they can take. Yeah.
So we're using that as journalists in Namibia as well, where we're trying to maximize and look at how we can give our audiences the best from a shorter, life span. And we're using this through MTC. And we also have challenges when it comes to digitalization, where people do not have access to internet, and it's also quite expensive. I think that is also another issue on the African continent as well as here in South Africa.
Yep.
I am currently not having a local SIM card. Because of that.
Because of the price.
Yes, because of the price. So we're also looking at how we can bring in people from the rural areas and connect them to the internet as well.
Yeah.
And MTC is looking at affordable ways where they can bring in everyone. 081, everyone, everywhere. Connect everyone, everywhere.
Well, we're not doing that well, are we? we're not doing that well. I mean, let's be honest here. We've got an issue where in various parts of the country, if you're not in the big metros, you might very well have serious issues of connectivity.
Yeah, I mean, for years we've heard about the digital divide, right? And it's very apparent in rural areas. But my colleagues are talking about the opportunities and the potential that technology brings, but it also brings with it a lot of harm and the potential to harm. And I think that's something that a lot more effort needs to be taken to counter the harm that these technologies bring by spreading of fake information and misinformation. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, that's a big one, of course, the misinformation issue. And then there's the role that media practitioners need to be playing then in getting some kind of legislative process going in South Africa. I mean, let's talk a little bit about that. Your thoughts on just how we're doing in legislating digital platforms in South Africa so that you've got the trust that is necessary still in the creators of mainstream news content?
Yeah, I mean, that's a complicated question. I don't know if I would necessarily want legislation that regulates information too much. I think that has the potential to be quite harmful for society.
Yeah. Well, let's talk a little bit about the collaborations that you guys want to get up to now that you're part of the fellowship. Yeah.
On the first day when we were introducing ourselves and Mohamed was talking about his platform, I immediately thought, like, that sounds very similar to the work I'm doing. So we've already had informal discussions about how we could potentially collaborate. Yeah.
Brilliant.
And Jan is very much into health as well, and me focusing solely on I cover almost everything in Namibia because we don't have the luxury of having a desk, but I identify myself as a health journalist. So Jan focuses really so much on health, and I would want him to help us when I tell the Namibian story and the African continent at large, because what we're trying to do with the fellowship is to create a balanced narrative of the African continent, not just Namibia, South Africa, and Somalia, but to have collaborative efforts for the African continent on how we can change how people view Africa. So it's sort of stories from us to the African continent. So I would love them to help us on how we can show that we can have abortion legalized in Namibia. How we can do that. Abortion is currently legalized in South Africa. Yes. Right? It's been for the past over 20 years. Yes. But how can we get that to other African continents? So that collaboration is very much important and serious on how we tell the documentary from the Namibian perspective and for the African continent as well. This will include Malawi, Zambia, Zimbabwe, Kenya, all the other African countries.
Can you imagine that you have this conversation, you're able to collaborate with Jan, and then you've got, as a result of a discussion like this, you've got media practitioners that are watching and want to reach out and say, well, I also want to lend a hand. And that's essentially what the AU Media Fellowship wants to do. Your collaborative wish list?
Yeah, during my time at the AU Media Fellowship, I collaborated and met with so many people in the sense of the work that they do. I'm amazed by it, and Jan is doing fantastic work. I saw some of his work; he showed it to me, and yeah, I feel like this whole fellowship should be about collaboration. It should be about working together because we're all doing the same thing, essentially, but different sort of works. So the mission is how can we collaborate as much as we can into amplifying African voices and shaping the narrative.
Yeah, you guys are doing such great work. And I said this earlier, for young journalists, even established journalists that are watching right now and are wanting to say, okay, well, next year I want to join the fellowship as well. Just talk to me about what the program looks like, what you're expecting from the program moving forward.
What I'm specifically expecting from the program moving forward is how I can use AI, artificial intelligence.
Okay. Everyone's terrified of AI. You say that and people think, oh, she won't be writing her own stories, which is not actually the truth. Yeah.
We want to use AI and we don't want AI to replace journalists.
Yes.
We want to use AI to enhance our stories and to make them better, right? Newsrooms are shrinking. Journalists are thinking they're losing their jobs. Here at SABC, you've retrenched last year.
Yes.
And it was quite an intense process for all of you and the former employees of the broadcaster. But we want to use AI we want to embrace it. We don't want to run away from it and feel that it's going to steal our jobs, right? So I want to use AI to enhance how I'm going to tell the production because what I want to do is have a documentary, right? So we're going to have AI and use it to enhance the documentary process of how we're going to produce this news story. So I want the young reporters who are currently watching as we're sitting here to know that digitalization has changed how people are looking at news, how people are consuming news, but we can use it to our advantage. We can use it to enhance our stories. We can use it to amplify what we are telling. We can use it to produce more quality, more quality, less time consuming for us as journalists as well. But we still need to fact check. We need to fact check. We need to be very, very cognizant of the fact that AI, we feed AI, right? We're still in charge here.
Yeah. Let me ask you this, because obviously when you're with the AU, you're going to be told about Agenda 2063 quite a lot, because that's going to be a target for you guys. I mean, how do you keep that top of mind, Mohamed?
Yeah, I mean, like, what I try to incorporate the work that I do. I was going through Agenda 2063, believe it or not, during this fellowship, because people tend to focus on SDGs a lot.
Yeah.
And I was told as well that Agenda 2063 was actually before SDGs.
Yeah.
So I didn't know that. And
it's a lot of education work that's necessary.
Yeah. I guess that's what the whole fellowship's about, learning and unlearning what you've learned from before, and learning some new topics and subjects. But yeah.
Yeah. Give us your Twitter handles. Let's hope that you get not just more followers, but those collaborative wish lists are able to be fulfilled. Yeah.
Mine's JW Bornman _.
JW Bornman _. Very easy. Yours?
Tuyeimo Haidula.
Okay, that's it.
Straightforward.
That's it, Mohamed.
And mine is it's actually complicated. It's
okay. Let's do it slowly.
It's at MOA and my surname Mohamud.
Okay, MOA Mohamud. That's not that complicated.
Okay.
That was pretty simple.
Okay, cool.
Mohamed Mohamud, Tuyeimo, thank you so much. Jan, a great pleasure having you guys in studio. They are your AU Media Fellows for 2023, and their work, of course, is going to be really telling a different story about the continent. All the best to them. Let's take a short break. We're back in a moment. Welcome back. So this week, the Competition Commission here in South Africa launched an inquiry into the media and digital platforms market. To tell us exactly what the inquiry aims to do, we are joined via Teams now by Mr. Siyabulela Makunga, who is the spokesperson of the Competition Commission. Mr. Makunga, a good morning to you. Thank you so much for giving us your time after what was a very long night for South Africans watching the Springboks. He nods there. We're all quite tired. But tell us a little bit about what this inquiry aims to do.
Thank you very much, Naledi, for having us. And yes, we would like to join millions of South Africans in extending our congratulatory messages to the Springboks. It was a humdinger, but obviously one that we expected. And we hope that they can also do well in the next and final round of the competition. And happy Media Week. I see, judging by the conversations that we had earlier, that indeed the important conversation of ensuring that we've got a sustainable, credible, and independent media sector is ongoing, not only in South Africa, but in the African continent. But coming to your question, as a commission, we saw a need that the need to be an inquiry, which obviously is established in terms of Section 43B of the Competition Act, where we can examine whether there are any features in the media sector that may restrict, distort, or impede competition. So we decided to have what we call a broad inquisitorial investigation into the media sector, so we can scrutinize the distribution of the media content on South African digital platforms, especially those that are mediated, and look at how the advertising technology impact or shape the commercial relationship between buyers and sellers of digital advertising inventory. And we believe that this comes at a very critical time for the media industry in South Africa, as news consumption rapidly shifts towards mediated digital platforms like Google, Facebook, TikTok, as well as YouTube, while you see that traditional sources of advertising revenue spend for print and broadcast continues to decline.
Yeah, but what spurred the inquiry on? I mean, were you getting complaints? What was it that led to, the need for you as the Competition Commission to set it up?
No, look, we have been monitoring and we are interacting with various stakeholders like the South African National Editors Forum. We're happy to see that they are quite vocal in the space, because our view is that the digital platforms, the dynamics within the sector can easily influence the revenue streams. And obviously, this is one of the key focus areas. So we want to concentrate on looking into search engines, social media sites, video sharing platforms, news aggregation platforms, as well as art tech market participants. And obviously, this would be looking at your supply, demand sides, and exchange. And obviously, with a forward-looking approach to assess the impact of new technologies adopted by the digital platforms, such as the artificial intelligence set, which also include the support infrastructure like ChatGPT.
Yeah, just to bring it down a little bit, because I know that when we start talking about digital media, it can get so technical that we leave some of our viewers behind. But to understand really what you're investigating, and let me give it a shot here at trying to explain it. What you're investigating here is how digital media collects revenue, and if in any way, shape or form that impacts revenue collection for traditional media, correct?
No, correct. Obviously, news distribution used to be obviously consumed through traditional platforms, and with the evolution of the industry, we need to make sure that is the distribution fair, is it transparent, is there fair arrangement between publishers and these news aggregation platforms, because we also feel that, like we have seen in Canada, Australia, where the content is equitable, rewarded, where publishers can actually be paid. So we want to make sure that there is a leveled playing field in the sector, where we can still appreciate that there is a functional sector, there's a credibility of news content, distribution is fair, but also we can also retain what we call independent and rewarding public interest journalism.
Right. So let's talk timeframes and then what happens at the end of this inquiry. I mean, obviously, once the inquiry has taken place, there'll be a list of recommendations. Are those going to lead to policy shaping?
Most certainly. The first thing, obviously, that I want to comment on is the time frame, that in terms of the Act, we are required to complete the investigation within a period of 18 months. So by January 2025, we should be complete with this exercise, but there has been a commitment from the inquiry panel to have this concluded within 15 months, and obviously we wish them all the best, as you are aware that these can be very complex issues. And yes, indeed, recommendations from the amendment of the Act in 2019, we can now make recommendations that are not going to be just recommendations. These are going to be enforceable remedial actions in the sector. And this means, Naledi, that we are going to influence policy, we are going to influence how the industry functions. So those remedial actions would really, in the main, make sure that the sector works better for the interest of all of those involved, including the public.
Yeah, sorry, I'm just trying to find out where those recommendations then go, so that if it is, let's say, latest 15 months from now, as the media were able to come back and follow up and say, well, did it go to the Department of Communications? Did it, where to next? Where do those recommendations then go?
Industry players like the Department of Communications, ICASA, the press ombuds, and obviously SANEF would obviously receive set of recommendations from the Commission, and this obviously is expected to shape the sector better. And the players like Google, TikTok, YouTube, and all other digital platforms will be part of this investigation. So most certainly, we are going to be making recommendations on how we can shape their operations into making sure that there is a fair, transparent, and functional media sector.
Yeah. Siyabulela, well, we really hope that you'll keep us updated as well as what comes out of the inquiry, even as it unfolds, because I imagine that the media industry, whether you're inside or outside of it, watching it, would be very keen to hear what is taking place inside the media and digital digital platforms inquiry by the Competition Commission. That day, Siyabulela Makunga, who is spokesperson for the Competition Commission, talking to us about how the Commission is working to really level out the playing field where the media and digital platform space is taking place. That's how we wrap up Media and Society. Thank you so much for joining us. With you again next week, Sunday, between 9 and 10. Have yourselves a great week.